The door lay face down in the creek like a drowned man, oak grain dark with water, iron hinges torn clean from the wood and dangling useless in the current. Joren Newfield knelt on the bank and ran his palm across the grain, reading the work the way another man might read a book, and what he found made his jaw tighten. Someone had built this door to last 100 years. Mortise and tenon joints cut true, 3 layers of planking with the grain running opposed for strength. And now it served as a bridge for cattle hooves and cart wheels, sinking deeper into the creek bed with every crossing. He stood and looked upstream, then down, then at the muddy tracks climbing the opposite bank. The ruts were recent, cut deep by a heavy wagon, and they led east toward the hills. Joren shifted the pack on his shoulders and followed. The sun was past its height when he found the farm. It sat on a long slope overlooking the creek valley, fields terraced into the hillside in the old way, stone walls holding back the earth. The farmhouse itself was timber and stone, well made but showing neglect in the way of a place where too few hands tried to do too much work. A boy of perhaps 9 years was driving a cow toward a barn that leaned slightly to the north, and when the boy saw Joren coming up the track, he stopped and stared. Joren raised one hand in greeting and kept walking. As he drew closer, he could see the house more clearly, and there in the south wall was an empty doorframe with a wool blanket nailed across the top and hanging down to cover the opening. The blanket stirred in the afternoon wind, and through the gap at the bottom he could see the edge of a table and a smaller child sitting beneath it. The boy left the cow standing in the yard and ran toward the house, calling out something in a language Joren did not know. The blanket was pulled aside and a woman stepped out into the sunlight. She was orc, green-skinned and tusked, wearing a work dress that had been patched at the elbows and hem. She was perhaps 30, broad-shouldered but not tall, built like someone who had worked hard all her life and would work hard until the day she died. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her dark eyes fixed on Joren with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust strangers at her door. Joren stopped 10 paces from the threshold and set down his pack. He pointed back the way he had come toward the creek and said, "Your door is in the water." The woman's expression did not change. "I know where it is. Good oak, well made, wrong place." She folded her arms. "What business is that of yours?" Joren knelt and opened his pack, pulling aside the blanket that protected his tools. Chisels and planes, a drawknife and several saws, a leather roll of drill bits, a box of dowels and a smaller box of brass screws. He selected a hammer and a pry bar and a handful of 3-inch nails, then stood and met her eyes. "I am a joiner," he said. "That door was built to last. I will hang it again before dark." The woman stared at him. The boy had come to stand beside her, and now a little girl emerged from behind the blanket, maybe 5 years old, with the same green skin and dark eyes and a thumb planted firmly in her mouth. The woman put one hand on the boy's shoulder. "We cannot pay you," she said. "Did I ask for payment?" Men do not work for nothing. Joren picked up his tools and walked past her into the house. The interior was dim after the brightness outside, but clean and orderly. The floor was hard packed earth covered with woven rush mats, the walls white-washed plaster, the roof beams oak. A table and 4 chairs, a cupboard, a cold hearth with cooking pots hanging from iron hooks. 2 doors leading to other rooms, both still on their hinges. He turned and looked at the empty frame where he had entered. The woman had followed him inside, the children behind her. She watched him examine the frame, running his fingers over the splintered wood where the hinges had been ripped out. "Someone kicked it hard," Joren said. "More than once. The 3rd blow took it off." "Yes." He looked at her. "Do you have the hinges?" She hesitated, then nodded toward the cupboard. "In there." Joren found them wrapped in a rag at the back of the top shelf, 3 heavy iron strap hinges with the screws still attached and the screw holes torn through the wood that had held them. He laid them on the table and studied the damage, then looked up at the woman. "I need to fetch the door. It will take an hour, maybe less. When I come back, I will need a chisel and boiling water." The woman frowned. "Why boiling water to clean the hinges? Creek water is full of rust." She glanced at the children, then back to Joren. "Borvik will show you the way down to the creek. There is a cart path that is easier than the way you came." The boy straightened when she said his name, clearly proud to be given a task. Joren nodded and followed him back outside. The cart path wound down the hill in long switchbacks, rutted and overgrown but passable. The boy walked ahead in silence for several minutes, then stopped and turned around. "Are you really going to fix our door?" "Yes." "Why?" Joren considered the question. "Because it should not be in a creek." The boy thought about this. "Mama says we will get a new one someday, when we have money. Your mother should not have to wait." They reached the creek and Joren waded in, the cold water rising to his knees. The door was heavier than it looked, waterlogged and awkward, but he managed to drag it up onto the bank. The boy helped him tip it over so the water could drain out, and together they carried it back up the path, the boy holding one corner and Joren taking the weight. By the time they reached the farmhouse again, the sun was lowering toward the western hills. The woman was waiting with a bucket of steaming water and a rag, and Joren set to work cleaning the hinges while she watched from the doorway. The little girl sat on the threshold and watched too, her thumb still in her mouth. "What is your name?" the woman asked after a while. "Joren Newfield." "I am Asta. My son is Borvik. My daughter is Ashka." Joren nodded without looking up. He had the first hinge clean now, the iron dark and sound beneath the surface rust. He dried it carefully and set it aside, then started on the second. "Where are you traveling to?" Asta asked. "North. There is work in the timber country. You are a long way from any road." "I go where the work is." She was silent for a moment. "I meant what I said. We cannot pay you." "I heard you the first time." He finished with the hinges and turned his attention to the doorframe, chiseling away the splintered wood around the old screw holes and drilling new ones slightly offset. The work was careful and slow, and the sun was touching the hilltops when he finally lifted the door into place and drove the first screw home. Asta came to hold the door steady while he worked, and the children stood to one side and watched in silence. The final screw went in just as the last light was fading from the sky. Joren tested the swing of the door, adjusted the bottom hinge slightly, tested it again. It moved smooth and true, closing with a solid thunk that spoke of good work and tight joints. Asta ran her hand along the edge of the door, her fingers tracing the repaired frame. In the dimness, her face was hard to read, but her voice was quiet when she spoke. "Thank you." Joren gathered his tools and packed them away. When he straightened, Asta was still standing by the door, one hand resting on the wood as if to reassure herself it was real. "It is nearly dark," she said. "Will you stay for supper?" Joren looked at her. In the last gray light he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself ready for rejection. Behind her the children waited, the boy trying to look unconcerned and the girl leaning against her mother's leg. "Yes," Joren said. The meal was simple, barley porridge and bread and a little cheese, but it was hot and filling. They ate at the table by the light of 2 tallow candles, the children quiet at first, and then gradually beginning to talk, asking Joren questions about his tools and his travels, and whether he had ever built a boat. Joren answered in short sentences, but he answered, and the boy's eyes grew wider with each response. Ashka fell asleep at the table, her head pillowed on her arms, and Asta carried her to bed in one of the back rooms. When she returned, she poured Joren a cup of weak ale and sat down across from him. "There is a barn," she said. "It is dry and there is clean hay. You are welcome to sleep there. I will be gone in the morning, I know, but tonight you are welcome." Joren drank his ale and said nothing. Borvik had fallen asleep too, slumped in his chair, and after a moment Asta rose and woke him gently, sending him off to bed. When she sat down again, she looked at Joren with an expression he could not quite name. "The door," she said. "It was kicked in 4 days ago. 3 men came saying my husband owed them money. They wanted the cow, the furniture, anything of value. I told them my husband was dead and the debts died with him. They kicked in the door to show me I was wrong." Joren's hands tightened on the cup. "Where is the magistrate?" "In the valley town, 2 days' walk. I have no money for the journey and no one to watch the children while I am gone. The men said they would come back. They said next time they would take what they were owed. When they did not say." Joren set down the cup. "The door will hold." "But it is only a door, I know." They sat in silence for a while, the candles burning low. Finally, Asta stood and showed him out to the barn, carrying a candle to light the way. The barn was as she had described, dry and neat, with stalls for animals and a loft above full of hay. Joren climbed the ladder and made himself a bed in the corner, and Asta left the candle burning on a shelf below. He did not sleep for a long time. He lay in the darkness and listened to the night sounds, the wind in the eaves and the rustling of mice in the thatch, and he thought about the door and the woman who lived behind it and the 3 men who had kicked it down. In the morning he did not leave. He told himself it was because he had noticed the bracket on the barn door hanging loose, the nails rusted through and the wood beginning to split. It would take an hour to fix, maybe less, and it would be poor craftsmanship to walk away from a job half done. Asta said nothing when she saw him working, just brought him bread and a cup of milk and left them on a post nearby. The bracket led to the shutters on the house, which were warped and would not close properly. The shutters led to a crack in the doorframe of Borvik's room, which needed to be filled and sanded smooth. The crack led to a stool with a broken leg and a shelf that had pulled away from the wall, and a dozen other small repairs that accumulated like snow, each one minor in itself, but together adding up to a house that was slowly coming apart at the seams. Joren worked through the day and into the next, and Asta watched him with a kind of wary confusion, as if she could not quite believe he was real. The children followed him everywhere, asking questions and handing him tools and generally making nuisances of themselves in the way of children who had not had much to be excited about in a long time. On the 3rd day, Joren repaired the bed frame in Asta's room, which had cracked under the weight of the straw mattress and was sagging badly on one side. He worked in silence while Asta stood in the doorway, and when he tested the repair she came over and sat on the edge of the bed, bouncing slightly to check the strength. "It is solid," she said. "It will last." She looked up at him. "Why are you still here?" Joren did not answer immediately. He gathered his tools and wiped the wood dust from his hands, and when he finally spoke his voice was careful and flat. "There is more work to be done." "There is always more work. That is not an answer." He met her eyes and saw the challenge there, and beneath it something that might have been hope or fear or both. He could have told her the truth, that he had nowhere else to be and nothing else to do that mattered more than this, but the words would not come. Instead he picked up his toolbox and walked past her out of the room. That evening Asta made a better meal, a stew with vegetables and a little salted pork, and they ate together at the table while the children chattered and the candles burned. After the meal, Borvik brought out a set of carved wooden animals, worn smooth with handling, and set up an elaborate game on the floor involving a battle between sheep and chickens. Ashka insisted on narrating the entire affair in a high-pitched voice, giving each animal a personality and a grievance, and Joren found himself watching with something that felt dangerously like contentment. When the children were finally in bed, Asta sat across from Joren and folded her hands on the table. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said. "A fever. It came fast and took him in 3 days. He was a good man, a good father. He worked hard and he loved us, but he was not good with money." Joren waited. He borrowed to buy seed one spring when the rains failed. Then he borrowed to pay back the first loan, then again to cover the winter. I did not know how bad it was until after he died. The men who came, they had papers, legal papers. "I cannot read very well, but I know what a debt mark looks like." "How much?" 40 silver. She said it quietly, the way someone might announce a death sentence. Joren did not react outwardly, but inwardly he was calculating. 40 silver was more than a year's wages for a laborer, more than a small farm could earn in 3 good seasons. It was a crushing weight, the kind of debt that ended with a family losing everything. "Did your husband leave anything?" he asked. "Tools." "A few." "He was a carter before he was a farmer. He had good tools, well made, but I do not know what they are worth." "Show me." Asta led him out to a shed behind the barn, carrying a candle. The shed was small and crowded, filled with the accumulated debris of a working life. Asta pulled a wooden chest from under a pile of sacks and opened it, revealing a collection of hand tools wrapped in oiled cloth. Joren knelt and examined them one by one. A saw, a hammer, several chisels, a draw knife, a plane. All of them worn but serviceable, the kind of tools a careful craftsman would maintain. He was about to close the chest when he noticed something odd about the interior. The depth did not match the exterior. He rapped his knuckles against the bottom and heard a hollow sound. "There is a false bottom," he said. Asta leaned closer. "What?" Joren ran his fingers along the edge of the chest bottom until he found a small gap. He worked his knife blade into it and pried gently, and the bottom lifted out in one piece, revealing a shallow compartment beneath. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Asta took it with trembling hands and unfolded it carefully. Even in the candlelight, Joren could see the official seal at the bottom, the careful script. Asta stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at him with wide eyes. "I cannot read it," she whispered. "What does it say?" Joren took the paper and held it close to the candle. It was a receipt, dated 4 months before Asta's husband died, acknowledging full payment of a debt of 40 silver to a merchant named Garrett Voss of the valley town. At the bottom was Voss's signature and seal, and beneath that a note in a different hand certifying the transaction before a magistrate's clerk. "It is a receipt," Joren said slowly. "Your husband paid the debt in full, 4 months before he died." Asta took the paper back and stared at it, her hands shaking. "Then why did they come? Why did they say we still owed? Because they thought you could not prove otherwise." Her face went hard, anger replacing shock. "They lied. They kicked down my door and threatened my children, and they lied." "Yes." She folded the receipt and tucked it inside her dress over her heart. When she looked at Joren again, her eyes were bright with tears, but her voice was steady. "I need to take this to the magistrate. I need to make them pay for what they did. I will come with you. You do not have to." "I know." They left at dawn the next morning, Borvik and Ashka bundled into warm clothes and riding in a small cart pulled by the cow. Asta had wanted to leave them with a neighbor, but the nearest neighbor was an hour's walk away, and Joren had pointed out that the journey would be faster with the cart than on foot. They made good time down the valley road, the cow plodding steadily and the children entertaining themselves with games and songs. The valley town was small but prosperous, built where two rivers met, and the road crossed north into the timber country. The magistrate's hall was a stone building near the center of town, and Asta left the children with the cart while she and Joren went inside. The clerk at the desk was a thin man with ink-stained fingers who looked up with impatience when they approached. His expression soured when he saw Asta, and he did not bother to hide his disdain. "The magistrate is busy," he said. "Come back tomorrow." "I need to see him today," Asta said. "It is important." "I am sure it is. Come back tomorrow." Joren stepped forward and placed a silver coin on the desk. The clerk's eyes flicked to it, then to Joren's face. "We need to see him now," Joren said quietly. The clerk hesitated, then scooped up the coin and gestured toward a door at the back of the room. "Wait there. I will ask if he will see you." They waited in a small antechamber for perhaps 10 minutes before the clerk returned and ushered them into the magistrate's office. The magistrate was an older man with gray hair and a stern face, sitting behind a desk covered with papers and ledgers. He looked up when they entered, and his gaze settled on Asta with cool assessment. "You are the orc woman from the hill farm," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir. My name is Asta Noren. I know who you are. Your husband owed money to Garrett Voss. Voss has a legal writ of debt collection. If you have come to ask for mercy, you are wasting my time. The law is the law." Asta pulled the receipt from her dress and laid it on the desk. "My husband paid the debt 4 months before he died. Here is the proof." The magistrate picked up the receipt and examined it, his expression unchanging. He read it slowly, then looked up at Asta. "Where did you find this?" "Hidden in my husband's tool chest. I did not know it was there until 2 days ago." The magistrate set down the receipt and leaned back in his chair. "This complicates matters. Garrett Voss is a respected merchant. If he has been collecting on a debt that was already paid, it is a serious matter. I will need to summon him and hear his explanation." "He sent 3 men to my farm," Asta said. "They kicked down my door and threatened to take everything I own. They said they would come back." The magistrate's eyes narrowed. "When was this? 6 days ago. Did they take anything?" "No. I told them I had nothing to give and they left, but they damaged my property and frightened my children." The magistrate wrote something in a ledger, then looked up at Joren. "And who are you?" "Joren Newfield. I repaired the door." "Are you a witness to the events the woman describes?" "No, I arrived after." The magistrate grunted and turned back to Asta. "I will summon Voss and his men. If this receipt is genuine, they will be fined for the unlawful entry and for attempting to collect a paid debt. If the receipt is false, you will be arrested for fraud. Do you understand?" "I understand. Come back in 3 days. I will have an answer for you then." They left the hall and collected the children, who had attracted a small crowd of onlookers curious about the cow and the cart. Asta ignored the stairs and climbed up beside Borvik, and Joren led the cow back toward the road. They had gone perhaps 100 yards when a man stepped out of an alley ahead of them and blocked their path. He was tall and heavy-built, with a red face and small eyes, wearing a leather coat that had seen better days. Behind him, 2 other men emerged from the alley, both carrying clubs. "Well now," the first man said, "the orc woman from the hills, and she has brought her mongrel brats to town." Asta's hand tightened on the side of the cart. "Get out of the way." "I do not think so. You have been telling lies about me, woman, lies to the magistrate. That makes me very unhappy." "I told the truth. You tried to steal from me. You kicked down my door." The man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Your husband owed me money. I came to collect. If you cannot pay, I will take what I am owed, starting with that cow." Joren stepped between the man and the cart. You heard what the magistrate said. Come back in 3 days and he will settle it. The man looked at Joren as if noticing him for the first time. Who are you? Someone who does not want trouble. Then step aside and there will not be any trouble. No. The man's grin faded. He glanced at his companions, then back at Joren. You are either very brave or very stupid. Either way, I am going to enjoy beating you bloody. He swung without warning, a wide, looping punch aimed at Joren's head. Joren swayed back and the fist passed an inch from his nose. The man stumbled forward off balance, and Joren hit him once in the ribs, a short, hard blow that folded him over and sent him to his knees gasping. The two men with clubs charged. Joren sidestepped the first swing and caught the second club on his forearm, the impact sending a jolt of pain up to his shoulder. He twisted and yanked the club out of the man's hands, then used it to block the next attack. Wood cracked against wood and the club split down the middle. Joren dropped the broken pieces and drove his elbow into the nearest man's face, feeling cartilage crunch under the blow. The first man was climbing to his feet, still struggling for air. Joren kicked his legs out from under him and he went down hard, striking his head on the cobblestones. The third man hesitated, looked at his two companions on the ground and ran. Joren stood over the fallen men, breathing hard, his forearm throbbing where the club had struck. A crowd had gathered, people stopping to watch the fight, and somewhere in the distance he could hear a whistle blowing. Asta climbed down from the cart and came to stand beside him. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "I will be fine." The whistle was getting closer. Asta glanced toward the sound, then back at the men on the ground. "We should go." "No, we wait." The town guard arrived a moment later, two men in leather armor carrying staves. They took in the scene with practiced eyes, noting the crowd and the men on the ground and Joren standing over them. "What happened here?" the older guard asked. "Those men tried to steal my cow," Asta said. "This man stopped them." The guard looked at the man Joren had kicked, who was still lying on the cobblestones holding his head. "Is that true, Voss?" So this was Garrett Voss himself. Joren committed the face to memory. Voss groaned and sat up slowly. "She is lying. I have a legal writ. I came to collect on a debt." With clubs and threats in the middle of the street, she provoked us. The guard snorted. "Save it for the magistrate. Get up, all of you. You are coming with us." They hauled Voss and his men to their feet and marched them away, the crowd parting to let them through. The older guard paused and looked back at Joren. "You had better come too. The magistrate will want your account." Joren nodded. Asta climbed back into the cart with the children, and they followed the guards back to the magistrate's hall. The magistrate was not pleased to be interrupted again, but his irritation faded when he heard the guard's report. He listened in silence while Joren described the confrontation, then turned to Voss. "Well, what do you have to say?" Voss straightened, trying to reclaim some dignity. "She owes me money. I have every right to collect. If I used strong words, it was because she refused to pay what she owes." The magistrate picked up the receipt from his desk. "According to this, she owes you nothing. Her husband paid the debt in full 4 months before his death. Unless you can produce evidence to the contrary, you are guilty of fraud and assault." Voss's face went white. "That receipt is a forgery." "It must be. I never received payment." "Then where is your copy of the debt contract? Produce it, and we will see whose claim is true." Voss hesitated. "I do not have it with me." "How convenient. You have 3 days to produce the original contract. If you cannot, I will assume this receipt is genuine. In the meantime, you are fined 10 silver for unlawful entry onto the woman's property, another 10 for attempting to collect a paid debt, and another 10 for assault in a public street. 30 silver total. Pay the clerk on your way out." Voss opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. He looked at Asta with pure hatred, then turned and walked out of the office, his men trailing behind him. The magistrate turned to Asta. "Keep that receipt safe. I will need it when this matter goes to trial. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you. Thank the man who repaired your door. If he had not been with you today, this would have ended differently." Asta glanced at Joren, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. They left the hall and walked back to the cart in silence, and it was not until they were on the road out of town that she spoke. "You did not have to fight them," she said. "They would have taken the cow." "It is just a cow." "No, it is your livelihood, your children's food." "It is not just a cow." She was quiet for a long time, guiding the cart down the rutted road while the children dozed in the back. The sun was setting, painting the hills gold and crimson, and the air was growing cold. "When we get home," Asta said finally, "I am going to make a proper meal. Chicken if I can catch one, and bread with honey. And you are going to sit at my table and eat it, and you are not going to leave until I say you can." Joren looked at her. "Is that an order?" "Yes." He allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Then I will obey." They reached the farm after dark, the children asleep in the cart and the cow plodding patiently up the last slope. Joren unhitched the animal and led it to the barn while Asta carried the children inside one at a time, their heads lolling against her shoulder. When he came back to the house, she was lighting candles and stoking the fire, and the room was beginning to warm. "I lied about the chicken," she said without looking up. "It is too dark to catch one now. We will have stew again. Stew is good." They ate together at the table, just the two of them, the children asleep in their beds. Asta ladled the stew into bowls and cut thick slices of bread, and they ate without speaking, the silence comfortable and easy. When the meal was done, Asta poured 2 cups of ale and sat back in her chair, studying Joren across the table. "You have been here almost a week," she said. "Yes." "When are you leaving?" Joren looked down at his cup. "I do not know. You said you were traveling north, to the timber country." "There is work there." "There is work everywhere. But not everywhere has a door that needs hanging." He met her eyes. "No, not everywhere." Asta reached across the table and took his hand, her grip warm and strong. "I do not understand you, Joren Newfield. You fix my door and my barn and my furniture. You walk 2 days to protect me from thieves. You fight 3 men in the street for a cow. And you will not tell me why." Joren looked at their joined hands. "Maybe I do not know why. I think you do. I think you know exactly why. You are just afraid to say it." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough and low. "I am not a man who belongs anywhere. I have been traveling since I was 16 years old, working where I can, moving when the work runs out. I have never stayed in one place longer than a season. I have never had reason to. And now I have repaired your door and I still have not left. Draw your own conclusion." Asta's fingers tightened on his. "Stay. You do not know me. I know you are a good man. I know you are honest and skilled and you care about things that matter. I know my children trust you and I trust my children's judgment. That is enough. It is not that simple." "Why not?" Joren pulled his hand away and stood up, pacing to the window. Outside the night was dark and the stars were bright, and he could see the shadowy outline of the barn and the fields beyond. "Because I am human and you are orc," he said. "Because your neighbors will talk, and the merchants in town will refuse to trade with you and your children will be called names. Because the world does not look kindly on people like us. People like us. People who cross lines that are not supposed to be crossed." Asta stood and came to stand beside him at the window. "My husband was orc. He was a good man and he loved me, but he was not strong, not in the way that matters. He let the debt grow because he could not face it, and when he died, he left me to clean up the mess. I loved him, but I do not need another man like him." She turned to face Joren, her expression fierce. "What I need is someone who will stand with me when the world turns cruel, someone who will fix the door when it breaks and fight the thieves when they come. Someone who will stay, not because it is easy, but because it matters. Can you be that man?" Joren looked at her, this orc woman with green skin and dark eyes and a will like forged iron, and he felt something inside him shift and settle into place. It was not a dramatic change, not a revelation or a transformation. It was simply the recognition that he had found the place where he belonged, and the only question was whether he had the courage to claim it. "Yes," he said, "I can be that man." Asta smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. She took his hand again and led him back to the table, and they sat together until the candles burned low and the fire died to embers. 3 days later they returned to the valley town for the magistrate's hearing. Garrett Voss was there with a lawyer, and the lawyer argued that the receipt was fraudulent, that it had been forged by Asta or her late husband to avoid payment. But the magistrate had examined the paper and the seal, and he had consulted with the clerk whose name appeared at the bottom, and the evidence was clear. The receipt was genuine. Voss was fined another 20 silver for fraud and ordered to pay Asta compensation for the damage to her property. The men who had kicked in the door were fined separately and warned that any further harassment would result in imprisonment. Voss left the hall in disgrace, his lawyer arguing all the way to the street, and Asta walked out with her head high and the receipt still tucked safely against her heart. On the way home, Joren asked her what she would do with the compensation money. "Pay off the other small debts my husband left," she said. "Buy seed for the spring planting. Fix the roof on the barn before the winter rains come. Maybe buy a second cow if there is enough left over." "You could buy a new door," she laughed. "I already have a new door, or a repaired one which is better than new, and I have the joiner who repaired it." Joren said nothing, but his hand found hers on the seat of the cart and held it. The weeks that followed were good ones. Joren set up his workbench in the barn and began taking commissions from the neighboring farms, building furniture and repairing tools, and doing the 100 small jobs that a skilled joiner could always find. Asta worked the farm with Borvik's help, preparing the fields for winter and laying in stores of food and fuel. Ashka followed Joren everywhere, chattering constantly and handing him the wrong tools with great enthusiasm. The neighbors talked, of course. An orc woman and a human man living under the same roof, unmarried, with 2 children in the house. Some of them disapproved, and some of them simply watched with curiosity, waiting to see what would happen. But Asta had never cared much what people thought, and Joren cared even less, and so the talk eventually died down to a low murmur. Autumn came on with cold winds and early frosts. Joren insulated the barn and built a partition to create a small workshop separate from the animal stalls. He built a chair for Borvik, sized to fit the boy's growing frame, and a small table for Ashka where she could draw and play. He built a shelf for Asta's kitchen, and a chest for storing winter clothes and a dozen other things that made the house more comfortable and the work easier. One evening after supper, Asta asked him if he regretted staying. Joren looked up from the piece of wood he was planing. "Do you ask because you think I do? I ask because I want to know." He set down the plane and considered the question seriously. "No, I do not regret it. Not even when the neighbors whisper, especially not then." Asta smiled and went back to her mending, and they sat together in comfortable silence while the children played on the floor. The harvest came and went, a modest yield but enough to see them through the winter. Joren helped with the cutting and binding, working alongside Asta in the fields until his back ached and his hands were raw. Borvik drove the cart, proud to be given responsibility, and Ashka gleaned the fallen grain, her small hands quick and clever. When the last sheaf was stored in the barn, Asta declared a celebration. She invited the closest neighbors, 3 families who had been cautiously friendly throughout the summer, and prepared a feast of roasted chicken and vegetables and fresh bread. Joren built a long trestle table to fit everyone, planing the boards smooth and fitting the joints tight. And on the evening of the celebration, they carried it outside and set it up in the yard. The neighbors arrived at sunset, bringing food and drink and children of their own. There was music, a farmer with a fiddle and his wife with a hand drum, and after the meal the children danced in the firelight while the adults sat and talked and drank. Joren found himself drawn into conversations about crop rotation and animal husbandry, and the quality of the roads, topics he had never thought about before and now found oddly engaging. As the evening wore on, Asta stood and called for quiet. The music stopped and everyone turned to look at her, and in the firelight her face was serious and solemn. "I want to thank you all for coming," she said. "This has been a hard year, but it has also been a good year. I have learned that I am stronger than I thought, and that I do not have to face the world alone. And I have learned that family is not just blood, but also the people we choose to stand beside us." She looked at Joren, and he felt his throat tighten. "Joren Newfield came to my door 6 months ago because he saw something broken and wanted to fix it. He stayed because he is stubborn and kind and too proud to leave a job half done. And now he is part of this family, and I want everyone here to know it." She held out her hand and Joren stood and took it, and the neighbors clapped and cheered. Borvik and Ashka came running over, and Asta pulled them into the circle, the 4 of them standing together in the firelight. One of the neighbors, an older woman with gray hair and a mischievous smile, called out, "Are you going to make an honest man of him, Asta?" Asta looked at Joren. "I had not thought that far ahead." "Neither had I," Joren said. "But now that you mention it," Asta continued, "it does seem like the sensible thing to do. Very sensible. So what do you say, Joren Newfield? Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air, and Joren felt the weight of them, the enormity of what she was offering. A life, a family, a place in the world. Everything he had spent 16 years running from and everything he had not known he wanted until he found it. "Yes," he said, "I will marry you." The neighbors erupted in cheers and applause, and someone struck up the fiddle again, a wild, joyful tune that set the children dancing. Asta kissed him, her tusks clicking gently against his cheek, and he held her close while the fire burned and the music played. They were married after the harvest, in a ceremony that was half human tradition and half improvised nonsense invented by Borvik and Ashka. The children insisted on giving Asta away, walking her solemnly across the yard to where Joren waited by the newly built trestle table. A traveling priest happened to be passing through the valley and agreed to perform the service, and the neighbors gathered to witness the vows. Joren spoke his promises in a clear voice, meaning every word. To stand beside Asta in good times and bad, to care for her children as his own, to build a life together on this hill farm and make it a home. Asta spoke her own vows, her voice steady and strong, promising to honor and cherish, and never let him forget that he was loved. When the priest pronounced them married, Joren kissed his wife, and the neighbors cheered, and Borvik and Ashka ran circles around them shouting with excitement. The celebration lasted into the night, the trestle table groaning under the weight of food and drink. Joren had built extra benches to accommodate everyone, and the neighbors crowded along both sides, talking and laughing and telling stories. Children ran wild in the darkness, playing games of tag and hide and seek, their voices high and bright. Asta sat beside Joren at the head of the table, her hand in his, and he looked out at the gathering and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was his life now. These people, this place, this family. He had traveled for 16 years looking for work, never staying long enough to put down roots, and now he had roots so deep he could not imagine pulling them up. Borvik came over and leaned against Joren's shoulder, tired from the day's excitement. Joren put an arm around the boy and felt him relax, a small warm weight against his side. Ashka was asleep in Asta's lap, her thumb in her mouth, and Asta stroked her daughter's hair with gentle fingers. "Are you happy?" Asta asked quietly. Joren looked at her, this woman who had asked a stranger to stay for supper and ended up giving him everything he had never known he needed. "Yes," he said, "I am happy." The fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, and the neighbors began to drift away one by one, calling out blessings and good wishes. Joren and Asta carried the sleeping children to bed, then returned to the yard to clean up the remains of the feast. They worked together in the darkness, clearing plates and cups and folding the tablecloth, and when the work was done, they stood together and looked out over the farm. The fields were dark and still, the barn a solid shadow against the sky. The house stood quiet and peaceful, the door that Joren had repaired still hanging square and true in its frame. Everything was as it should be, everything in its place. "Come inside," Asta said. "It is late and we have work in the morning, in a moment." Joren walked over to the door and ran his hand along the wood, feeling the smooth grain and the solid weight of it. This was where it had started, with a broken door and a stubborn refusal to let good work go to waste. And now here he was, married and settled and happier than he had ever thought possible. He turned and found Asta watching him from the doorway, her expression soft. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am glad I found your door in the creek. So am I." She held out her hand and he took it, and they went inside together, closing the door behind them. The house was warm and quiet, the children sleeping peacefully in their beds, and Joren followed Asta to their room, the bed he had repaired, now their marriage bed. They lay together in the darkness, Asta's head on his shoulder, and talked about small things. The seed they would need for the spring planting, the repairs still needed on the barn roof, whether Borvik was old enough to learn woodworking. Ordinary things, the daily concerns of people building a life together. Eventually, Asta's breathing slowed and deepened, and Joren knew she was asleep. He lay awake a while longer, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the creak of timbers and the whisper of wind in the eaves. This was his home now. These were his people. He had found the place where he belonged, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure it stayed whole and strong. In the morning he woke to the sound of Ashka singing in the other room, a nonsense song about chickens and dragons. Asta was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen, and the smell of porridge and honey drifted through the house. Joren dressed and went out to the kitchen, and Asta smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning, wife." Borvik came in from outside, carrying a bucket of water from the well, and set it down carefully by the hearth. "The cow is restless this morning," he reported. "I think she might be getting sick." Joren went out to check on the animal and found her chewing her cud contentedly, showing no signs of illness. He reported this to Borvik, who looked relieved, and they fed the cow together while the sun rose over the hills. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Work in the morning, meals together at midday, more work in the afternoon. Joren took commissions from the valley town and the neighboring farms, building furniture and cabinets, and occasionally traveling to deliver a finished piece. Asta managed the farm, planting and harvesting and caring for the animals, with Borvik and Ashka helping as much as two children could. The winter came on cold and hard, and they stayed close to the fire in the evenings, Joren carving small toys for the children while Asta spun wool and Borvik practiced his letters. Ashka learned to read simple words, sounding them out with great concentration, and Joren felt an absurd pride when she managed to read an entire sentence without help. Spring arrived with mud and rain and the hard work of planting. Joren helped turn the soil, guiding the plow while Asta and Borvik followed behind, dropping seeds into the furrows. Ashka walked the rows after them, patting the earth down with her small hands, singing to the seeds to make them grow. Summer brought good weather and a steady stream of work. Joren built a new shed for storing tools, and a chicken coop to replace the old one that had been falling apart. He taught Borvik how to use a saw and a plane, showing him how to read the grain of the wood and work with it instead of against it. The boy had good hands and a patient temperament, and Joren thought that someday he might make a fine craftsman. Autumn came again, the second harvest since Joren had arrived, and it was a good one. The fields yielded enough grain to see them through the winter with plenty to spare, and Asta sold the surplus in the valley town for a price that made her smile. They added a third cow to the barn and began talking about expanding the fields, clearing the scrub from the upper slope and terracing it for planting. That winter, Asta told him she was pregnant. They were sitting by the fire, the children already in bed, and she said it quietly, almost shyly, as if she were not sure how he would react. Joren stared at her for a long moment, the words not quite making sense, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her close. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes, I am sure." He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed her until she pushed him away, laughing too. They sat together and talked about names and cradles and all the things they would need to prepare, and Joren felt a happiness so deep it was almost painful. The baby came in the summer, a girl with green skin and her father's gray eyes and a cry that could wake the dead. They named her Senna, and Borvik and Ashka were beside themselves with excitement, fighting over who got to hold her and singing to her, and generally being as helpful as over-enthusiastic children could be. Joren built a cradle, the finest piece of work he had ever done, with carved panels showing scenes from the farm and the family. He sanded it until the wood was smooth as glass and rubbed it with oil until it gleamed, and when he set it beside the bed, Asta cried and told him it was perfect. The seasons turned, and the years passed, each one blending into the next in a succession of planting and harvest, and the slow, steady work of building a life. Borvik grew tall and serious, learning the joiner's trade and eventually setting up his own small workshop in the barn. Ashka learned to cook and sew, and manage the household accounts, her quick mind suited to numbers and planning. Senna grew from baby to toddler to a small, fierce girl who refused to wear shoes and insisted on helping with everything whether she was wanted or not. Joren built her a small workbench and gave her a set of child-sized tools, and she spent hours beside him in the workshop, hammering nails into scrap wood and declaring that she was building a castle. More children came, each one a blessing and a joy and a new adventure. A second daughter, then a son, then another daughter. The house expanded to accommodate them, new rooms added on and old ones divided, until the original farmhouse was surrounded by a sprawling collection of additions and annexes that somehow all fit together. The neighbors who had been cautiously friendly became true friends, stopping by for meals and celebrations, and to lend a hand when work needed doing. The valley town grew more prosperous, and with prosperity came tolerance, and eventually no one thought twice about the human joiner and his orc wife and their growing family. Joren never traveled again. There was too much work to do at the farm, too many commissions from the valley and the surrounding countryside, too many children who needed him, and a wife he loved more with every passing year. He had spent half his life wandering, and now he had found the place where he belonged, and he had no intention of ever leaving. On a clear autumn evening, 20 years after he had first found the door in the creek, Joren sat at the long trestle table he had built for his wedding feast. The table had been expanded twice since then, lengthened and reinforced to accommodate the family and friends who gathered around it. Tonight it was crowded with neighbors and relatives, children and grandchildren, all of them talking and laughing and passing dishes back and forth. Asta sat beside him, her hair now streaked with gray, her face lined but still beautiful. Borvik was at the far end of the table with his new wife, a human girl from the valley town, and they were arguing good-naturedly about the best way to build a roof. Ashka was serving food, her own children running wild in the yard with the other young ones. Senna sat nearby with her husband, an orc farmer from the next valley, and they were deep in conversation with one of the neighbors about crop yields. Joren looked out at the gathering, at the faces he knew and loved, and felt the same deep contentment he had felt on his wedding night. This was his life. This was his family. This was the place he had built with his own hands and filled with love and laughter. Asta leaned over and whispered in his ear, "What are you thinking?" "That I am a fortunate man. You are indeed, and I am a fortunate woman to have found a man stubborn enough to repair a broken door and wise enough to stay for supper." Joren smiled and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "It was a good door. It deserved to be saved. And what about me? Did I deserve to be saved? You did not need saving. You needed someone to stand beside you. There is a difference. And you have stood beside me for 20 years. I will stand beside you for 20 more and 20 after that, and as many as we are given." Asta squeezed his hand, and they sat together in companionable silence, watching the people they loved gather around the table Joren had built, in the home they had made together, on the farm that had become the center of their world. The fire burned bright, and the stars came out overhead, and the sounds of conversation and laughter filled the night. Children ran past chasing fireflies, their voices high and bright, and someone started a song that everyone joined in, the words rising and falling like the wind through the trees. Joren closed his eyes and listened, feeling the warmth of Asta's hand in his, the solid weight of the bench beneath him, the good oak table in front of him that he had planed and sanded and fitted together with his own hands. Everything was as it should be, everything in its place. He had been a wanderer once, a man with no home and no ties, moving from place to place and never staying long enough to matter. And then he had found a broken door lying in a creek, and he had followed the cart tracks to a hill farm where a widow and her children were holding a blanket over an empty door frame, and everything had changed. He had repaired the door, and she had asked him to stay for supper, and he had never left. It was as simple as that and as complicated and as perfect. The night wore on, and the guests began to drift away, calling out farewells and promises to return. The children were collected and carried off to bed, protesting sleepily, and the adults helped clear the table and put away the benches. Eventually, only family remained, Borvik and Ashka and Senna and their families, all of them lingering in the warm night. Joren stood and stretched, feeling the familiar ache in his back that came from a lifetime of hard work. Asta stood beside him, and they walked out to look at the farm, the fields dark and peaceful under the stars, the barn solid and strong. "It is a good place," Asta said. "It is. And it will be here long after we are gone. The children will care for it, and their children after them." "Yes." They stood together in the darkness, holding hands, and Joren thought about all the years that had passed and all the years yet to come. The door he had repaired still hung in its frame, solid and true, a testament to good work and careful hands. It had brought him here to this place and this woman and this life, and he would be grateful for it until the day he died. "Come inside," Asta said. "It is late." In a moment. But she did not let go of his hand, and so they stood together a while longer, looking out at the farm they had built and the life they had made. And when they finally went inside, closing the door behind them, the house was warm and full of the quiet sounds of family, and Joren knew that he was home.